In Galatians chapter 2, Paul continues defending his apostleship and clarifying the true gospel of grace. This chapter is pivotal. It not only reveals the unity of the apostles, but also exposes the tension between law and grace. Let's walk through it verse by verse. Paul begins in verse 1. Then 14 years after I went up again to Jerusalem with Barnabas, and took Titus with me also. 14 years after his conversion, Paul returns to Jerusalem. Barnabas, known as the Encourager, is with him. But Titus, a Gentile believer, is the key figure here. Paul intentionally brings him as living proof that Gentiles can be accepted without circumcision. Verse 2. And I went up by revelation, and communicated unto them that gospel which I preach among the Gentiles. Notice this wasn't Paul's idea. God revealed to him to go. Paul shares the gospel he has been preaching, not because he needed validation, but to show there was no contradiction between his message and the apostles in Jerusalem. Verse 3. But neither Titus, who was with me, being a Greek, was compelled to be circumcised. This is huge. The leaders in Jerusalem did not demand Titus to be circumcised. Grace alone was enough. This verse is a direct blow to the Judaizers who claimed Gentiles must follow the law. Verse 4. And that because of false brethren unawares brought in, who came in privily to spy out our liberty which we have in Christ Jesus. Paul exposes the infiltrators' false brethren trying to enslave believers back into legalism. Liberty in Christ was at stake. The battle wasn't just theological, it was spiritual warfare for the soul of the gospel. Verse 5. To whom we gave place by subjection? No, not for an hour. Paul says they didn't yield even for a moment. Why? So the truth of the gospel might remain pure for future generations, including us. Verses 6 to 7. Paul explains that those who seemed to be leaders added nothing to his message. Instead, they recognized that Paul was entrusted with the gospel to the Gentiles, just as Peter was to the Jews. 2 missions, 1 gospel. The same Lord behind both. Verse 8. For he that wrought effectually in Peter, the same was mighty in me toward the Gentiles. Paul reminds us it's God who empowers ministry. It's not about the man, but the God who calls and equips. Verse 9. James, Peter, and John gave Paul and Barnabas the right hand of fellowship. This was official recognition. The gospel of grace Paul preached was fully aligned with the apostles in Jerusalem. Unity confirmed. Verse 10. Only they would that we should remember the poor, the same which I also was forward to do. The only request was compassion for the poor. Grace is not lawlessness, it produces love in action. Now verse 11 takes a dramatic turn. But when Peter was come to Antioch, I withstood him to the face, because he was to be blamed. Here we see Paul rebuking Peter. Yes, Peter. Why? Because Peter was compromising the gospel. Verses 12-13. When Jewish believers arrived, Peter withdrew from eating with Gentiles, fearing criticism. His hypocrisy led others astray, even Barnabas. This shows how fear of man can even sway great leaders. Verse 14. Paul confronts Peter publicly. If thou, being a Jew, livest after the manner of Gentiles, why compellest thou the Gentiles to live as do the Jews? The gospel was at stake. Peter's behavior implied that Gentiles were second class unless they followed Jewish customs. Paul wouldn't allow it. Verse 15-16. Knowing that a man is not justified by the works of the law, but by the faith of Jesus Christ. This is the heart of Galatians. Justification is by faith alone in Christ, not by law, not by works. Paul repeats it for emphasis. If you miss this, you miss the gospel. Verse 17. Paul anticipates an objection. If we seek justification in Christ and are found sinners, does that make Christ a minister of sin? Absolutely not. Grace does not promote sin. Verse 18. For if I build again the things which I destroyed, I make myself a transgressor. If Paul went back to law-keeping as a means of righteousness, he'd be contradicting the very gospel he preached. Verse 19. For I through the law am dead to the law, that I might live unto God. Paul explains that the law condemned him to death, but in Christ he is free to live for God. Now, verse 21 of the most powerful verses in the New Testament. I am crucified with Christ, nevertheless I live. Yet not I, but Christ liveth in me. This is the Christian life. The old Paul is gone. Christ is the new life within him. Our identity is no longer rooted in self, but in the indwelling Christ. Verse 21 concludes, I do not frustrate the grace of God, for if righteousness come by the law, then Christ is dead in vain. If salvation could be earned by law-keeping, then the cross was pointless. Grace is not an add-on, it's everything. Galatians chapter 2 reminds us that the gospel of grace cannot be compromised, not by fear, not by tradition, not even by respected leaders. Paul shows us that justification is by faith alone, and the life we live is Christ living in us.